Hello, and welcome to another WLRN live stream. I'm Thistle Pettersen, and I'm here with Emily Faye. And today we're going to be discussing the Israeli-Hamas conflict with our guest, Cindy Sheehan, who is a longtime USA-based peace activist, anti-war activist, critic of the United States government and the war economy. And she's going to be giving her opinion and thoughts about how women and children in particular are impacted in this conflict, and also, how she understands this conflict. And we're going to have a discussion, and you can participate by putting your questions and comments respectfully. We're going to try to moderate the comments into the chat, and we can just have a group discussion. So thank you for tuning in, and without further ado, I will bring Cindy on. Welcome, Cindy.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, so why don't you start out by telling us how do you analyze war? What lens do you use when you're analyzing war?
Hello, good morning, everybody. So it's morning still here in California, but I was say, oh, you see my picture. Okay.
Yeah, we see your picture, yes.
All right. So, thank you, Emily and Thistle. It's great to talk to you. What lens do I use to analyze war? Well, at the very base of it, war is absolute 100% unequivocal barbarism. There should be no mass killing of human beings, whether they're innocent civilians or troops. Like, many troops are also, even though they've been trained in this, we have to look at that through a different lens too, because here in the United States, we know that many of our young people who are in the poor working classes, and my son included, who was killed in Iraq as a member of the U.S. Army almost 20 years ago now, on April 4th. I can't believe that some days it feels like 20 minutes and some days it feels like, a lot longer. But so I look at it through that lens, is that, if my son was wrong for joining the military to get college benefits and to what he was promised by his recruiter, he joined in the year 2000, then why do I have to suffer because of war? Why does his family, his siblings, his father, his friends, why are we suffering? It's because war is barbaric, and nobody should take our young people, and I would think that most parents raise their children to resolve differences nonviolently. But then, because of economic circumstances or whatever, there's probably a lot of U.S. troops that enjoy what they're doing, but that wasn't the case for my son. And so train them to be cold-blooded killers. And in the case of Israel and Palestine, then we have troops that are indentured. They have to serve. Everybody in Israel serves. And so I just look at it through that lens, is that it is an absolutely barbaric thing that humans have been doing to each other since time began. But when is the human race going to grow up and say that war is ridiculous? And it's not even to resolve conflicts. It's to actually enrich people for power, for resource control, for to enrich the 1% who are already rich, to further enrich them, to impoverish the rest of us, and to put mothers like me into lifelong grief. That's kind of the lens I look at it through.
Okay, yeah. That was quite an answer, and this is why you're anti-war. You're not just a peace activist. You're against war because it impacts more than just the soldiers. It impacts the families of the soldiers. It impacts the civilians, innocent civilians, especially in this Israeli-Hamas conflict. We're seeing so many civilians who are being slaughtered, which is just, I can't even imagine the trauma that all these people are going through. Emily, do you want to jump in there at all, or we can go on to the next?
I mean, I really agree with what Cindy is saying, that especially like what you're saying about a lot of the times, I think in discourse around war, there's a villainizing of soldiers as like, the enforcers of what's happening. And it's true what you're saying, like the young men who are signing up to go to these wars, the vast majority of them, I don't think, are doing it because they, want to kill or are cold-blooded killers. Maybe there's a small number of them that are like that, but it's this war machine of powerful, rich men who want things and are willing to kill innocent people, whether they're young men that signed up to fight or women that are just living in a place that becomes a conflict space. It's the male war machine churning on and making a mess for everybody else.
Yeah. So that's so depressing to think about. I wish that we collectively, and I truly believe this, that if the majority of the politicians and the people in charge of major powers in the world, if women were in charge, I don't think we would see this type of bloodshed, at least as extremely as we see it. I don't know what you think about that, Cindy.
Well, I think if the women who are in charge were in charge, if there were women like Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice, then there'd be, much more bloodshed, I think. I think Hillary Clinton is a vicious war criminal. She's a warmonger, and, she has proven that over and over again. So I guess it would be, what I don't really look at it, as a Democrat, Republican, woman, female, male issue. I look at it as an imperialistic issue. For somebody to raise as to the top as high as Hillary Clinton has gotten, or, other vicious warmongering women like Nikki Haley or Liz Cheney. I could go on and on and on, but I can only be here an hour. I could go for an hour just listening to war criminals. It's more of a systemic problem. So you have to almost, even for people of color or LGBT people, if you get up to that kind of level, that means you have bought into the white male privilege paradigm, and you act like a white male. You don't represent your community. Barack Obama is a good example of that, and Hillary Clinton's a good example on the gender issue. So that's my feelings.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's why we need a woman-centered, female-centered, female-driven society, because women enlist in the patriarchy and help the patriarchy. Emily and I were talking about this the other day. Who binds the feet of the girls in China? It's their mothers. Mm-hmm. Often
Yeah.
it's women who, like you said, can be some of the most bloodthirsty of the
Well, if
war
women
mongers.
like us were in charge, things would be different.
Exactly.
But,
Exactly. I mean,
that's not gonna
Well,
happen.
it's
I
coming at it
tried,
from a
I
different
tried
way.
really hard to
you
have
tried
some
very hard,
good.
and you did a good job down there in Crawford, Texas, Cindy Sheehan. You did a fantastic job, and you're still with us, and it's really great to be discussing this with you. I'm going to go on to the next question that we had, and that is, what is your understanding of the history of the conflict between Palestine and Israel, and in what ways does this current moment, this current situation, differentiate itself from the past?
Well, first of all, I don't really like the Hamas-Israeli conflict kind of meme or paradigm or talking point, because that presupposes that there's some kind of equality, that it's an equal fight. It's actually, and this is apt because it's in that part of the world, it's definitely a David and Goliath kind of thing, where Goliath is a big bully and David is using his sling and stones to try and defeat that. But the history of the Israeli-Palestine conflict goes back really not just to October 7th. It goes back to the late 1800s, where a Zionist movement started a homeland for Jews in Palestine. And then, of course, after the Holocaust, which was a horrific event, nobody is minimizing that, but also what isn't talked about is that not only were Jews exterminated, but Catholics, socialists, gay people, gypsies, anybody where Hitler or the Germans thought were harming the fatherland or the bloodline of the white, blonde, blue-eyed Germans. They were eliminated in that. And then after World War II, European Jews were granted land that wasn't anybody's right to give. People were already living there, and they were Palestinians, they were Christians, they were Jews, had been living in mostly harmony. Nobody lives in complete harmony uh, ever. No community doesn't have its issues, doesn't have its struggles. But then literal terrorists came to chase Palestine, and even Jews and Christians were killed in this beginning. And so the Nakba happened. I don't know, something like 14,000 Palestinians were killed that were living in Jenin, I believe. And then the current bombardment, where we've seen many bombardments of Gaza since Israel put up the wall, the current one has killed more now than the Nakba did. And that I think the last thing I heard, and they had a brief pause, a timeout. Israel has resumed, but before the resumption, I believe like 20,000 Gazans have been killed, half of them children. And so I believe, now I have an extreme position on this. I realize that there are many, and I want to say there are many Jews who are not Zionists. There are many people of other faiths who are Zionists. Zionism means an extreme colonialism, and that there are people on both sides of the conflict. There are Israelis who don't agree with what Israel is doing, and there's Jewish Voices for Peace. And there are young people in universities who are trying to speak up for the Palestinian people, and they're being told that there would be a severe discipline if they didn't stop doing that, etc. And so my position is Israel is a colonial apartheid state, obviously. And colonialism, again, with war is barbarism. And they're trying to, this is a genocide. It's not a war. It's not a conflict. It's Goliath trying to exterminate David. And I think this time the international community, many of the people in the community are getting it right. They're saying that what's happening and what happened to Gaza even before October 7th was a crime against humanity. And they're calling for an end to it. And so I think that there's no two-state solution. It's a one-state solution. That's a Palestinian state. Go back to when it was Palestine. And if the European Jews who live there want to be integrated, what am I saying? I live in California. I'm trying to solve this conflict that people have gotten Nobel Peace Prizes for, but has not been resolved to this day. Hello?
Hi.
We muted ourselves.
Did I leave you speechless?
No.
I thought I just gave a monologue and I got cut off or something.
No, that was great. I did a good, coverage. I think it's, like, I think it's kind of just such an impossible situation. I feel like it was set up to be a perpetual conflict from the very beginning, the way, here's this land. We don't have the right to give it away or anything, but we are here. It's for you now, like it's just such a ridiculous way to start off in a way that's going to be a conflict. I don't know that I feel the same way about you, right? Like, who am I to say what the solution should be or whatever? I don't feel like I have an idea of, I don't think that I can't think of a solution that would work and that wouldn't like continue to create conflict. I feel like that is why
it's like a festering wound. I mean, ever since I've been in high school, this has been, which is a long time ago in the 1980s, this has been a conflict that involves many horrible murders of innocent civilians on both sides. But I would agree, the number of Gazans, obviously, and Palestinians that have been killed, civilians, is much higher than is on the Israeli side. I totally see that. But none of them, no innocent civilians on either side should be killed, and I, why is this a festering wound? And you said in your monologue, Cindy, that the Jews, in all these different groups did live in this region with basic harmony, not full harmony, before this 1948 thing started. Like, it was the UN that did that, right? I mean, why did they set it up the way that they set it up? Do you know?
Basically, I think that it's very difficult because I think the choice of Palestine for the European Jews who had been horribly oppressed during the Holocaust. And I actually wrote a piece on my Substack, Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox Substack. If people want to subscribe, it's free. I think that before that, though, there was this, like I said, this Zionist movement, and I think it was basically a racist movement because Europeans didn't want the Jews, living where they lived. And because you would think, to make sense of it all, Germany was the one that committed the Holocaust. So you would think that a piece of Germany would be carved out for the Jews, for a Jewish state. And but like, again, it's just really confusing, is why do we need like a Jewish state? There's no other states that say I'm this religion state. Although,
Interesting.
and most of the Arabic countries, they are mostly Muslim, but they don't say we're a Muslim state. And so I think that, first of all, why was that even an issue?
Oh, what?
But it's
No, I can answer that. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I think coming out of the Holocaust, that's like the whole state of Israel is, Jews, Zionists, like reacting to the Holocaust. We need our own space. We need our own military. We need to be able to, congregate and defend ourselves. And, I hear what you're saying. Like, why can't Jewish people just, like, I don't know, there's like more Jews living in New York City, I think,
Right.
New York State,
I
than there
know,
are in
and
Israel.
so they're definitely not in a really that much of an oppressed. But there are people who have prejudices and things like that, and they always will. And I think the issue we have with this Free Palestine or pro-Palestine movement is that there's still those people, and then the Congress just equated being Zionist with being anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so now we have even more of a challenge, because I think there are people in the movement that don't like Jews or hate Jews. And I don't want to say that, I don't like to say anti-Semitic, because that's another one of their words, because the Palestinian people are Semitic people. And I'm not against any people. I'm not against Jews. I'm against these like Netanyahu and those kind of people that are equating Palestinians with being animals and with being savages. And they say that they use their children as human shields or whatever. And that's what colonial powers have always said. That's what the white settlers from Europe said about our indigenous people. And so yeah, I think that's the problem, is that there is some hatred for Jews. And I think that kind of puts this cast over the whole pro-Palestinian movement, is that they think that because they're very paranoid, and I understand the Holocaust was a horrible thing, and they do have a reason for some paranoia, but there's got to be a time when we've come into the 21st century, and there's mostly no animosity towards Jews. In fact, they seem to be a protected, I don't even want to say minority, which is fine, which is great. But we have to understand that, like we've talked about, is that there are people who have been born and died and born and died, who are still, like you said, Thistle, a festering wound. And I'm sorry for talking so much, but when like before World War I, if there were wars, combatants would actually go to battlefields or fight in open places, and very few civilians were killed. Now, how can, in a place,
it's all terrorism.
Yeah, it's so crowded, how you can't avoid killing civilians. That's why war should be abolished.
Yeah, war should be abolished. And I mean,
I know. I think one of the things that like festers this wound, like when I think about someone like Netanyahu, like his brother was killed in a terrorist attack, like in the 80s or something like that. So it's like, he's never gonna stop, right? Like someone who not only is like, I'm the defender of Israel and the Jewish people, he also is like, my brother was killed by a terrorist. So when you have like and I'm sure whoever is leading in Hamas has had these personal effects. Everyone has. And so it's like, yeah, you're someone like having Benjamin Netanyahu, like he's never going to back down. He's always going to be a warmonger, because he feels like he's gonna kill all of Hamas because they killed his brother. And I feel like that is
very much a patriarchal way of
operating.
and
and using human shields. I mean,
how much is religion a part of this? Because it's a Zionist,
it's a big part of it.
Jewish religious state. And in Judaism, there's the concept of an eye for an eye, right? I mean, how much of that isn't it? It's in the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. It's like a common, anyway. I'm coming from a Christian background, and I just remember learning that Jesus came and said, no, we're not going to practice an eye for an eye. We're going to practice forgiveness and
love thy neighbor.
And love thy neighbor instead of an eye for an eye. And so I'm just saying, how much is, religion involved in this conflict? I'm sure that's a huge can of worms.
I know. Religion there's no way to take religion out of it, right? Because that's why the Jewish people are like the Zionists of the Jewish people feel the entitlement to the land of Israel, because it's the ancestral, it's where
it's the Holy Land.
It's where the story took place. It's where the Bible took place, or whatever. It's where the book happened. And so every Christianity and Islam both come out of Judaism. All three of those religions pray to the same God. They're little facets on a different take, but it's all
a male God.
It's all the same God. It goes back to the same Old Testament book. And I feel so hopelessly inept of how do you ever, ideally there would be some sort of actually non-partisan group that could hold, but it doesn't exist. I don't think, and I don't know how to make it happen. So, but I don't think there's any way to take it, especially, maybe I'm just speaking from the Jewish side, the Zionists, Jews, that it is intrinsic to their faith to live in the land of Israel.
And
which is also counter. There's plenty of other Jews that are if you
there's a lot of rabbis though and religious Jews who oppose Zionism.
Right.
And so, but there's also a lot of Christians who support it, because there's something is when the Holy Land is returned to the Jews, then Jesus is going to come back. So, and that's another thing. It's all based on myths.
Right.
It's like me saying, I'm not going to go to the South because there's a giant that's, what was that giant's name that had Babe the Blue Ox?
Mm-hmm.
And, just stupid like that, just stupid. Can I say shit? Stupid.
Yeah.
And so, but another thing is that I don't like to call Palestinians terrorists, because I believe that occupied, oppressed people have a right to resist. And so I believe they're more it's more the resistance. And so if there's any part of the side that's committing terrorism, I think it's the Israeli side, because they are actually actively, and I can only, I think, criticize Israel because I criticize my own, the country I live in, for being an occupational destructive force around the world. And Israel is concentrating on its land, where it's not the Israeli land, but Palestine is concentrating on that. It has bombed Lebanon and Syria, particularly since this started. But the United States spreads its cancer all over the world. And so and see, when you see people who think Israel is worse than the United States, you know that they hate Jews, because there's no comparison to what Israel does and what the United States does. What Israel does is atrocious on a smaller scale than what the United States does. So that's and this is, you called it patriarchy. And I started thinking, when my son was killed in Iraq in 2004, we didn't have the complete story about what happened to him yet. And I don't even know if we're going to ever get the truth about what exactly happened to Casey. But I put blame on George Bush, Dick Cheney. We've already mentioned Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, and of course the Democrat warmongers like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and all those people who promoted the war in Iraq. And I think Raytheon, Boeing, all of those, the Pentagon had the correct, were the correct places to put my anger. And but the one place I never put it was the people of Iraq. Is whoever fired the bullet that killed my son was only defending his community, right? He was, and I've gotten emails from Iraqis who say, "We're sorry, we don't hate you, we didn't hate your son, but we wanted the U.S. military out." And I understand that. That's something I understand, because if somebody tried to come and harm me or my children or grandchildren, I'd do the same thing. I would defend my community the same way that they defended their community. And so that's a different kind of what I call matriotism, is having love for all people, not just the people of your country, which is patriotism, matriarchy, patriotism, patriarchy. And, patriarchy is hegemonic, it's withdrawn, it's inward. Matriotism is outwards. It's loving all of humanity, not just your family or because where you're born is an accident. It's just like random. You could be born anywhere to anybody. And so just to love this geographic area, to me, seems very backwards.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I feel like the whole premise in 1948 for setting up this Zionist state was setting up a region to be, something that it does, this
a powder keg. They set it up to be a powder keg.
Yeah.
Right. And but for the UN's credit, which I don't really want to give them too much credit, because it's like, to me, it's a diplomatic cover for US imperialism, just like NATO is another arm of US militarism. But anyway, the NATO has something like 250 resolutions against Israel for what they do, and they have been calling for an immediate ceasefire, and not just a temporary one, but at one. And there just can't be a ceasefire. There has to be reparations. They have to tear down that wall. It's against international law. People are trapped there. They're in prison. So to have a ceasefire in the north, tell everybody in this 25 mile by 5 mile slit of land to find somewhere else so you won't be bombed is absolutely freaking ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's sort of this impossible powder keg, like you said, that it's been, set up. I mean, I think, like, to something you said earlier that I, partially disagree with. I do think that there's a slippery slope, a sliding scale of, what is resistance and what I would consider terrorism. I do think that a lot of what Hamas does, I consider terrorism. But like, I also don't, I understand why they're doing it, but I think that.
How do we break this vicious cycle? Because that's what it is. It's like, I mean, my brother was killed by.
Right. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind.
Right. How do we stop that? How do we abolish war?
Girl, I don't know.
Well, I mean,
You
you
gotta
have to
get rid of
give
all the warmongers.
the people some kind of hope and some kind of you know, something to look forward to. Is like, what are the people of Gaza? Hamas is a creation of was created after the wall came up. And what would you do? What would you do if you were trapped in an open air prison? Myself, I wouldn't just go, "Oh, God bless my captors." I would be fighting for my children and my grandchildren because I'm not a pacifist, but I'm against imperial war. I'm anti-imperialist. I'm against colonialism. I'm against occupation. It's almost like going to what Thistle is alluding at. It's almost like the military-industrial complex created Israel, because not only is it a powder keg, it's a gold mine for the military-industrial complex. And so, and then that was interesting because after the creation of Israel, and the general, who was also a war criminal, Eisenhower, became president of the United States. When he left after 8 years of mostly playing golf, he warned us of the growth of the military-industrial complex. And so I also am a historian. I majored in U.S. history at UCLA. And so before, like I was talking about, before World War I, the conflicts were mostly combatants. Less than 2% of the people killed were civilians. Now I think it's like 98%. I think that has reversed itself, correct? And so, but then World War I, look at the vast, that's right between World War I and World War II is when Smedley Butler wrote War is a Racket. That's when vast, immoral, illegal, unethical profits were made by the war machine. And then many of those same profiteers, this is like a history lesson, supported Hitler's rise and then World War II happened. So they're not about to give up their gravy train, right? So since then, we've had nonstop, our tax dollars and our nation's resources have gone nonstop to supporting these few people in this most destructive, disgusting business, the war machine. And so I think that might, if they didn't create this Israel-Palestine conflict, they're certainly benefiting from it and capitalizing on it.
That's one of the problems. I think that the people, I feel like these outside forces, the U.S. and you know, the other countries that are sticking their hand in to help have just as much. I think the United States has just as much a stake in continuing the conflict as it purports to say. Oh, we really want to stop this. I don't think the U.S. does want to stop it.
No,
well, it's been going on for ever since 1948 in some form or another, and it's almost like a dystopic sci-fi novel. It's like the war, and it's in the Holy Land, and it's an end of the world kind of type apocalyptic.
Well, and not even since 1948. I mean, people have been conquering that city of Jerusalem for thousands of years.
It's been under.
We destroyed a temple. We built another temple. Somebody else destroyed it. They built a mosque. You know.
Okay, well, that's a long ass time, and it's
it's all men's war and it's all men's religion.
How do
I see it?
Well, I think we do, obviously, because we're WLRN and we have a feminist analysis, and so we see that men are the perpetrators, the inventors, the primary inventors of this war machine, and they train primarily other men though Israel trains some women in.
Well, and the U.S. does too. The U.S., but you're right. It is a overwhelmingly masculine, you know,
Right.
energy.
And it's taking that propensity that, you know, women have, men have, in some of us, that to be violent. And it's training that instead of that innate propensity that we all have, that I think you were talking about earlier, Cindy. Instead of fostering that and training us to love one another, we're being trained to hate one another. And it's just gone on and on and on. And I just wish we had some kind of concrete solution. And I feel like it's related to women having power, but real power, not the kind of power that is power over and a power based on squashing others, but that power that you feel when you are with your family and you're feeling joyful and you're all singing, you know, like you get to be around the fire together. That's powerful. How can we move from this power over smashing paradigm that's patriarchal into one that is nurturing the loving side in every human being, regardless of their sex? How can we move towards that?
Well, that's a great question, because it's certainly, like we've talked about, is that the religious aspect of this conflict, and religions are supposed to be, you know, peaceful. And, you know, that's just a joke. And so the whole mythology of war and religion and everything is Orwellian, actually, when you think about it. And so I've had a long, well, not as long as some people, you know, to my regret, but since my son was killed, almost 20 years of activism and writing and thinking and doing. And what I really think needs to happen is that I've come to the conclusion that the forces at play against us are pretty overwhelming. And so I think that a local movement where, like somebody in the chat said, not in your head lesbian in the chat said, we have to create the solution. How about centering food versus land? And I think centering community, centering healthy things, like organic food, community gardens, community food, schooling, getting the community involved in raising our children. I know some of my colleagues who were in peace activism have created programs for elementary schools on peace. Why don't we have peace programs, and why don't we teach peace studies instead of U.S. history? Like I told you, I majored in U.S. history. It's a history of war and white men. That's all it is. It's war and white men, the whole time, until you get into upper division. Then you learn about other aspects of U.S. civil society. So I think doing more local things, and we can't really say that we can abolish war by doing that, because I'm sure the people of Gaza, they don't choose to be in this war, and there might be a war happen that we don't choose for ourselves either. The way the U.S. has been going, there could be active bombing here, the way the administration is happening right now. So I think we need to choose each other. And if we have these communities of care that we try to grow, which I'm trying to grow here in my own little way, trying to foster that, is that they can become connected, like a ground, like a gentle breeze across the continent, instead of this facing it up head on, because they they have all the weapons. And that would be another David and Goliath thing. I don't know if I'm making sense,
Yeah,
but your friend, not in your head lesbian, says communities of care. Absolutely. And then the more we become self-sufficient with each other, and I'm not saying isolationism at all. Human beings need each other, right? And so we need positive interactions with other human beings. Is that we need that, I think that has to be the way to go until, if we spread across and there's no more room to spread, then we have to go up and just start, eliminating the way that the people here in this, and it's not just about the leadership in this country, but because they've done a brilliant job of propaganda and miseducating us to believe that the United States is the greatest country that has ever been, and I wrote a book, and if people subscribe to my Substack with a paid subscription, I give the book free. It's called Myth America, the 20 Greatest Myths of the Robber Class and the Case for Revolution. And so the first thing we have to do is dispel these myths. Yeah, we are a country, but we're not great. No country has a right to exist. This country has committed many crimes. This country has a lot of karma. But if we start healing ourselves and our families and communities, we have to do that before we can even address the karma deficit this country has, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
If this country died tomorrow, I'm sure it would go to hell. And so I'm really, I mentioned that I was not sad when Kissinger passed away.
I couldn't even believe he was still alive.
Oh no, he was still alive.
I was genuinely saw that news and I was like, I thought he was dead
was still
already.
alive, and he had his disgusting fingers in the pie of U.S. imperialism. My Substack is Cindy Sheehan Cindy Sheehan Soapbox Newsletter. I had to think because I have a couple of podcasts as well, and I
What
write.
is it? Cindy Sheehan
Soapbox.
Substack.com.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to put it in the chat. But yeah, oh my gosh, there's just so much here, right? Like I have been, I've been studying, people have primarily labeled it as leftist grassroots community organizing, localism, regionalism, bioregionalism, organizing in your own community, creating that revolution, that gentle breeze that you're talking about going across the country because people in their local communities are growing their own food and having, building relationships with one another in a community of care. And to me, there's a lot of feminism in that. I think in that vision, I think that women hold that vision and are the grassroots organizers in our communities for the most part. And I also think it's the bombs are stronger. I hate that. I don't want that to be so, which I think goes to your point of being a peace activist, but not a pacifist, in that, we need to grow our own food, but there might come a time if we're literally having bombs raining down on us that we would have to organize a resistance and use violence. I mean, like what we saw with like the Zapatistas, for example,
Right.
which I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and that was a very powerful grassroots movement that inspired me to a vision of a caring community, a civil society that is resisting and defending itself because it has to, but that greening of the society, creating that ethic of care, is a big part of it too, and I think the only way that we're going to be able to really spread that around is if women, and not the Margaret Thatchers of the world, but if that women have to, somehow we need to shift the power so that women as a group collectively have power. Right now, it just seems like, whether you're in Israel or you're in Palestine, woman is the second class citizen still. She is still the subordinate, and that has to change, I think, before we're actually going to get to that ethical, that community of care that you're illustrating for us, Cindy.
Well, I think that what we're talking about is very subversive, but what I think that we have to stop asking men, and we have to stop asking the system for permission to do stuff. We just need to do it. And so, female principal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what she means.
I don't either. I'm getting distracted. It's a good chat, but I'm reading the chat.
It is hard to chat
and so I think that we just have to just do these things. And I think even men, and the reason why men are so oppressive against women or males and females, however you want to say, is because they know how powerful we are.
Yeah.
And they know that, and I think it was Emily who said, or I don't know which one, who said that in China, mothers bind the feet of their children. We have to get away from that, is thinking that we're lower class citizens. We have to get our power and not allow our daughters or other young women to be abused in those ways. So I think maybe our movement can start today. The women gathering together for communities of care. And I know I have a lot of really good friends who are male in the movements, and I know that they would be our great support system for us. So we don't want to exclude them, but they should be warned that they're not in charge. We're in charge. And so
I think men who want to be allies to women in our fight for equality or for a more equitable society, I think the bar oftentimes is like very low, and men need to step up. They need to understand that being a part of our movement for liberation really means it's not just saying something, it's not just showing support. In some ways it's doing the dishes, like it's cooking dinner, it's being a part of your
watching the young ones while we strategize revolution. They can keep an eye on the kids.
Absolutely. Well, can I just
okay, go ahead.
There was this really interesting article on NPR I read the other day, like 2 days ago, yesterday maybe, that was about a study. Some researchers had studied some tribe of people in South America, I think, that was that still lives quite self-sufficiently, in the jungle. And they studied how much they took a record of with the child rearing, every 20 seconds who was caring for the child. And they showed it's not just this structure of a nuclear family Americanism of a woman home alone with a baby crying, that this is a very unnatural way for children to be raised. It's a very unnatural position to put women into, to be alone, because when we're looking at these other cultures that maybe are living in a way that the rest of us lived in thousands of years ago, the baby is being passed from an aunt to but it still was 94% women who were doing the child care, even in this structure where they're advocating one woman alone shouldn't be caring for a baby, it should be the community, but it's still women. Men, right. Men need to hold the baby as much as the women are holding. They need to be as integral into that family structure of who is cooking and who is cleaning and who is making sure that the kids are getting to school. Like men and women in these structures need to take on that responsibility.
I'm not so sure about that, actually. I think that babies are dependent upon the woman's body for their sustenance, for their life, and so that therefore women being in charge of childcare, that there can be a feminist argument that that female separatism has its place, especially in talking about communities of resistance. After 5,000 years of patriarchy, we can't just suddenly go to matriarchy and include all the men in that. You know what I'm saying? Not that I'm saying we want matriarchy.
I agree with what you're saying, but what I'm saying is what I want to see men evolve. I think we have seen a huge evolution in women recently in the last several decades of women breaking out of oppression and saying, no, I want to have a career. I want to make my own choices. I don't want to be a wife and mother. And I think a lot of men, like if I'm speaking in a vast generalization of men, a lot of men still just want a wife to raise their children at home. And I think men need to step up. But I'm a lesbian separatist. I want to live alone with only women on women's land, and I don't want to have children. But I think
Emily,
if I was a woman that was having children with a man, I sure as heck would want that man to be able to change diapers just as much as I do and do all that. So if I was doing the breastfeeding, dude, I finished breastfeeding.
Okay, well, we're getting off topic.
Well, I want to say that's how I was when I had children. I made their father, who's now my ex-husband, it's like, okay, he would go get the baby and bring the baby to me to feed if it, when it was a little bit older in his own crib, change diapers. As soon as he got home, I'd leave so I could have some mom time Cindy time to myself, not mom time. So yeah, I mean, that was over 40 years ago when that was going on. So yeah, I see what you're getting.
Okay, we're getting way off topic here, but can I?
I'm sorry.
I think that we do disagree. I think that I don't trust men to care for kids. I have some pretty strong opinions about this, and I do think that part of the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian, or however you want to frame that, the war problem, the colonization, the brutality, and the male violence that's carried out through war, because it's been going on for so long, there's an argument to be made that men are not to be trusted. And that if you want to be a supportive male ally, and we want you as women to be supportive male allies and to evolve and all of that, then stay away from us and allow us to flourish and create our own place where sanctuary, women only, separate space, so that we can heal from patriarchy, because I don't think we can just suddenly change from 5,000 years of this system to, we're now all equal and we can all be human beings.
Yeah,
that's my opinion. And
clearly we're not ready for that.
Yeah, well, that's what we do, is like what you were saying, Cindy. We start in our own communities. How in our own home can we become more of a matriarchy in our own small community, branching out from our own home? How can we grow more food and then if a bomb is dropped on our neighborhood, how are we going to implement that matriarchal way of thinking into how we're going to resist conflict in our own neighborhood?
Well, I've been involved in like 3 revolutionary societies, not tangentially, not living there: Venezuela, Cuba, and I studied the USSR when it was Soviet. And women are in those societies, they're celebrated. They're celebrated as mothers, they're celebrated as workers, and they're celebrated as revolutionaries. One of I don't remember her name, a Katerina something, was the most deadly sniper in the Soviet army during World War II. And so it's almost like when I think of how strong our foremothers were here in the United States, the settlers who went with their families to, carve out a piece of land. I'm not saying that it was right, but, that they were building a homeland and they would have a baby strapped to them. They'd be out working on the fields and have a rifle on the other shoulder in case trouble came. And so that's a strong woman. And but the contributions of women in these revolutionary societies are celebrated. And so, in Cuba, the women have been able to keep their culture and their families alive during the blockade of the United States, but they're also expected to be combatants if there's any invasion, another invasion. And so I think that we just need to be like that. And so I used to be so against guns. I'm very anti-gun, but I recognize in the system that we live in this patriarchy with the male violence, they're essential for self-defense. And so I don't own any, but I live in a house that has responsible gun ownership in case something happens. So I don't know. We have to be able to defend ourselves and our families, but we also have to be nurturing at the same time to nurture a system, a culture that doesn't resort to violence as the first reaction to something, right? The violence should be reserved for self-defense or protecting other people. But if we lived in a culture that respected that, it would be a rare necessity.
Right. Instead, we live in a society that depends on mass violence in order for the economy to function.
Exactly. That's what our economy is based on. I say the only two things that the U.S. is good at making right now are weapons and type 2 diabetes.
Okay. Well, you know what? Thank you so much, Cindy, for being on our...
It's been great to talk to you. Let's do this again. Maybe I'll have you guys on my podcast. And we can continue the discussion of the communities of care.
Yeah. Women gathering for communities of care. I like that. It goes back to a book that I read in the 1990s that was a popular feminist text at the time. And it was called In Her Own Voice or something like that. And it was actually a scientific study of women's vernacular and the way that what women generally use in the way that they're describing ethics and morality. Somebody might know this in the chat, and it might come back to me as I talk about it. And then how men and how their ethics and their morality is shaped. And women, they found, come back to an ethic of care again and again. And men come back to an ethic of fairness again and again. And so I think, that's why I'm thinking, I wish I could remember the name of this author. I'm obviously not going to be putting this part into the podcast. But yeah, and that'll come out actually next Thursday, Cindy. I'll send you the link. That it'll be a polished version of, 30 minutes of our discussion.
Okay. Awesome.
30 to 40 minutes of our discussion today. But yeah, I think that an ethic of care is something that we all need, but I do think that women are particularly in a place in this patriarchal society where we can model that, and that this book that I read in the 1990s that did a study showed that women were more oriented that way than men were anyway. So, all right.
Well, we don't need no studies. We're women.
Right.
We know that, right? Yeah. We got to this point, so we're not stupid.
All right. Well, thanks again. And thank you to our online audience, and then also to the audience that is watching later on after this online live show. I'm Thistle Pettersen with WLRN. This is Emily Faye, and we've been speaking with Cindy Sheehan. I hope all of you have a wonderful day.
Peace out.